Good evening and welcome to Conservative Chat, a show brought to you each month by the Barkhamsted Republican Town Committee. My name is Juliana Simone, and my guest this evening is U.S. Senate candidate Peter Schiff. Hello, Peter.
Hi, Julian. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, you're welcome. Now, Peter, you are known mostly for predicting the financial crisis of our economy, which before it happened. And how did you come to forecast this in the first place?
Well, it's really not that difficult. It's not that I'm so smart. It's just that I understand economics. Unfortunately, so many people in Washington and on Wall Street don't. I mean, they think they do, but they've got it completely wrong. So when you really understand basic economic principles, it's not that difficult to understand how government interference in the free market leads to a crisis. And in this circumstance, I saw that the Federal Reserve keeping interest rates much too low. I saw how Wall Street and Main Street were taking advantage of that cheap money to buy things that they couldn't afford, to get all leveraged up. Wall Street was leveraged. Americans were buying homes they couldn't afford, using teaser rates and interest-only mortgages that were only available because of the artificially low interest rates, courtesy of the Federal Reserve. I saw the influence that Freddie and Fannie were playing in the mortgage market, that one of the main reasons that people could borrow so much is because the government was guaranteeing the loans. So the lenders dropped their guard. They didn't really care about credit quality because they knew that the government was, going to make good on the loan. So you had all that moral hazard. And I understood that if real estate prices were too high, which they were, that the banks that were financing all the mortgages, I knew that when the bubble burst, that there'd be a financial crisis. I knew that companies like Freddie and Fannie would go bankrupt based on all the loans they had guaranteed. And I knew that would bring on a crisis. But more important than that, I also predicted that the government would try to solve the crisis with bailouts and stimulus. And I said that that would make it much worse. And that is the real crisis, and that is still coming. So unfortunately, the worst is not behind us, the worst is ahead of us, which is why I'm running for Senate. I mean, I want to try to go to Congress and diffuse that time bomb before it explodes.
And we need people like you to do that.
Exactly. Unfortunately, there's not too many of me.
No, there's not. I think there's a few candidates in Connecticut this year that could do what you would do as well, and businessmen that are insiders.
Yeah, most people like me, I wouldn't normally go into politics. It's not something that I would want to do. I understand that government is a very destructive force, and I normally wouldn't want to partake. I want to be out in the private sector creating wealth. I don't want to be in the public sector destroying it. But the stakes are now so high that I need to go into government. I mean, because nobody in government understands what needs to be done. I mean, all they care about is getting elected. And our problems are beyond that. And everything that they do to get elected is what's making the situation worse.
Right. Yeah, well, you sound a lot like Mark Greenberg, who I work for. And you and Mark and Tom Foley, I think all of you are what we need down there. People that are on the outside, that are businessmen, that have created jobs, that know money. Like you said, a lot of the people that are elected don't know money. They don't understand money.
And of course, it's not that people who have created jobs, that we're going to go create them in Washington the same way. It's simply that we understand where jobs come from, because they don't come from government. But what I do know as a businessman is how governments destroy jobs, how governments put roadblocks in the way of entrepreneurs, how governments increase the cost of hiring people. So as a senator, I can't create any jobs, but there are 100 senators right now that are destroying jobs. And if I can just prevent that from happening, then the private sector will be able to create the jobs. Right now they can't because the government won't let them.
Right, and as long as we have people like Al Franken in the Senate circle, I don't think any American should be expecting anything good to come out of that.
Well, the problem is most of the people in the Senate, have never run a business,
right.
So they don't understand how regulations and taxes adversely affect business.
Right. So when was it that you predicted that anyway, Peter?
Well, I really started talking about this financial crisis probably back in 2004. I started writing op-eds about the housing bubble, warning about the problems. But I was warning about the NASDAQ bubble in the 1990s, and I was very critical of Wall Street and the dot-coms that they were bringing out. I started my investment career encouraging people to sell their tech stocks and their internet stocks, and kind of built my reputation within the industry for predicting the NASDAQ bubble. And when that bubble burst, I was expecting a much deeper recession than the one that we got. And the reason we didn't get the severe recession was because of the stimulus of Bush and Alan Greenspan. And when I saw the nature of that stimulus and the damage that it was doing, that's when I really start to warn about the real estate bubble that we were inflating and the far bigger crisis that lied in our future. And unfortunately, Obama and Bernanke are repeating all the mistakes of Bush and Greenspan. We are not letting the economy function. We are not letting the recession cure the economy from the malinvestments of the phony boom. We're instead using artificial stimulus in the form of cheap money and inflation to try to postpone the pain, and now it's going to be horrific.
Right. And Obama just seems to keep writing more and more checks. You know, that's his answer, is just to put us in more debt.
Sure. I mean,
trillions and trillions of dollars.
He ran on change.
Yeah.
He didn't change. He adopted George Bush's policies and just expanded them.
Exactly.
And all this big government is just an expansion of the big government that we had under Bush. The stimulus is, the same policy. The bailouts are the same policy. We need to repudiate big government, whether it's practiced by the Republicans or the Democrats.
Right. But how do you think you would persuade, let's assume that at least we got rid of the majority in the Senate, and we balanced that out more with some Republicans that are elected this year. How would you persuade the other side of the aisle, though, to stop passing their usual policies and legislation that, that deter the growth of our economy?
Well, what I want to do is, bring my track record of economic forecasting and my knowledge and my ability to persuade and educate, which I think I'm good at. I've made a career of that.
So you talk to my son.
To Washington and get the politicians that are there to understand how high the stakes are.
Yes.
And that we can't keep playing this game, of kicking the can down the road, trying to get elected one more time, that our nation hangs in the balance here. We have to make a stand for our country. And if we don't get reelected, we don't get reelected. I mean, that's why I publicly stated I only want one term.
Right.
You can't solve these problems if you're worried about getting reelected. And hopefully I can show them that they're listening to the wrong people, that guys like Ben Bernanke and Tim Geithner have consistently been wrong. They've gotten everything wrong. And they need to listen to people who understand economics, not people that have an agenda. And I think since I'm coming from a financial background, I run a brokerage firm, I am intimately familiar with what goes on in Wall Street. The problem is no one in Washington does. So you have all these Wall Street guys who have infected Washington, and they convince them that what's good for Wall Street is good for the country, and it's not. And somebody needs to explain to our leaders, that these guys have their own agenda. And they're not, it's not the national interest. It's lining their own pockets. And they've conned our legislators into lining their pockets with our money. And that has to end. And what I really want to do is be able to lead the Republican filibuster against the next increase in the debt ceiling.
No, I love it.
Some of my opponents want to talk about a balanced budget amendment. I mean, yeah, that's great, but it's not going to happen. We can't talk about balancing the budget. We have to actually balance it. And the way that we do that is we don't increase the debt ceiling. And that's easy to do because President Obama doesn't have to sign it. All we have to do is get 41 senators to refuse to vote to increase it, and that's it. The deficit spending stops with me.
Oh, I like that. Thank you. Now, President Wilson, he said the worst mistake of his presidency was his support of the creation of the privately controlled Federal Reserve System. Yes.
He made quite a few mistakes.
Well, and so in light of the Federal Reserve complicity, or at least ignorance during the financial meltdown, is it time to rethink the Federal Reserve System?
Well, absolutely. The new financial regulation that Obama is trying to cram through Congress actually gives the Fed even more power, as if they haven't done enough damage with the powers they have now. There's a lot to be said for abolishing the Fed, but it's a little bit I'm a little bit worried about doing that because then, maybe Congress would just take over their functions directly, which would be even worse.
I agree with you there.
So I think the best compromise at this point would be to rein them in, to kind of restore the Federal Reserve to its original mission, to diminish their power, to make them more independent and less political, so they stop simply acting as an engine of inflation to monetize government deficits.